May I have your leftover, sir? In Chicago's finest restaurant, that trembling plea made the lonely billionaire freeze. When he looked up, a thin young mother stood holding her baby tight under the harsh stares of wealthy strangers. Something in her quiet courage stopped him. He slid the plate toward her. "Take it." As he watched her feed her son with slow, careful breaths, his chest tightened. The motion was identical to the way his wife once fed their daughter, and grief he thought had long been buried surged back without warning. What happened next would change all their lives forever. Before we continue, tell us what time it is and where you're watching from. Subscribe and hype, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. At Marchand he sat alone at table 14, the same seat he'd chosen for 15 years. The burgundy leather felt familiar beneath him, worn smooth by countless evenings just like this one. Robert Wellington, 62 years old, former CEO of Wellington Technologies, a man worth more money than most could comprehend, lifted his crystal glass and watched the amber liquid catch the low chandelier light. A 20-year-old Bordeaux, the server had told him with practiced reverence. Robert brought it to his lips, let it touch his tongue, and felt nothing. No warmth, no pleasure, just liquid. The steak arrived, perfectly seared, just as he'd ordered it for the past decade and a half. Medium rare. No sides. He cut into it with mechanical precision, each slice exactly the same width as the last. Chew. Swallow. Repeat. Around him, the restaurant hummed with life, couples leaning across candlelit tables, businessmen laughing over deals, a family celebrating someone's promotion. But Robert existed in a separate dimension. A gray space where sound reached him muffled and distant, where taste had vanished, where every day felt identical to the one before. 15 years. That's how long it had been since the drunk driver ran the red light on Lakeshore Drive. 15 years since he'd buried his wife Margaret and their daughter Sophie, who'd been just 7 years old and wearing her favorite purple dress when she died. 7 years old. The same age she would always be in his mind, frozen in time, laughing as she chased pigeons in Millennium Park, her dark curls bouncing with each step. After they died, Robert had sold his company for an amount so large it made headlines. He donated millions to causes that seemed important: children's hospitals, drunk driving prevention programs, scholarship funds. He showed up to galas, cut ribbons at building dedications, smiled for cameras. Everyone called him generous. Philanthropic. A pillar of the community, but Robert knew the truth. It was all mechanical, empty gestures performed by a hollow man. He gave away money because he didn't care about it. He attended events because the hours had to be filled somehow. He existed but didn't live. For 15 years he'd been underwater, moving through a world that felt distant and dim, waiting for nothing in particular. He was about to signal for the check when he heard it. A voice, soft and hesitant, barely cutting through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Excuse me, sir." Robert looked up. Standing beside his table was a young woman, maybe 23 or 24 years old, wearing a thin denim jacket that had seen better days and a faded t-shirt beneath it. Her light brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her face carried the kind of exhaustion that came from months, maybe years of struggle. In her arms, bundled in a worn blanket that had been washed so many times the pattern had nearly disappeared, was an infant. Maybe 8 or 9 months old, Robert guessed, though he'd lost the ability to judge such things after Sophie. The woman shifted her weight from foot to foot, her arms tightening protectively around the baby. Around them, Robert could see other diners glancing over, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. The maitre d' was already moving toward them, his face a mask of professional concern. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman continued, her voice stronger now, more determined. "But you're not going to finish that, are you?" She nodded toward his plate, where most of the steak remained untouched. "If you're done, could we have it? For my son." There was no shame in her voice, Robert noticed, no embarrassment. Just a mother's fierce practicality, doing whatever needed to be done. The maitre d' arrived, his hand already reaching for the woman's elbow. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to." "It's fine," Robert heard himself say. His own voice sounded strange to him, as if someone else was speaking through his mouth. "She's with me." The maitre d' hesitated, clearly unconvinced, but stepped back. The woman's eyes widened slightly, surprise flickering across her tired face. Robert pushed his plate toward her, the scraping sound of china on linen unnaturally loud in his ears. "Thank you," she whispered. And then, without waiting for a response or caring about the dozens of eyes watching her, she knelt right there on the expensive Persian rug that ran beneath the tables. From her jacket pocket, she pulled out a clean cloth, a cloth napkin, Robert realized, though he couldn't tell where it had come from. It had been folded with care, pressed flat, kept clean despite everything. She spread the napkin on her lap and carefully began transferring food onto it. Her movements were methodical, efficient. She took the meat, the small portion of mashed potatoes that had come as a garnish, even the decorative sprig of parsley. Nothing was wasted. When she'd wrapped everything carefully, she produced a small plastic spoon, the kind that came with takeout containers, and scooped up a tiny amount of the mashed potatoes. "Here you go, baby," she murmured, her voice dropping to that particular tone mothers use, soft and musical. "Nice and warm for you." The baby, her son, made a small sound of contentment as she fed him, his tiny mouth opening for each careful spoonful. He had bright eyes that tracked his mother's face with complete trust, and when he smiled around the food, revealing no teeth yet, something inside Robert's chest cracked. Sophie had loved mashed potatoes. Margaret used to make them from scratch every Sunday, and Sophie would eat them with her hands, laughing when her father pretended to be scandalized. Robert sat frozen, watching this young mother feed her child with such tenderness, such complete devotion, kneeling on a restaurant floor while wealthy diners whispered around her. She didn't care. Her entire world had narrowed to her son, to making sure he ate, to keeping him safe and fed and loved. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert felt something pierce through the gray numbness. It was painful, like blood rushing back into a limb that had fallen asleep. A sharp needling sensation that was somehow both agony and relief. The woman finished feeding the baby, wiped his mouth with the corner of her jacket, and stood. She'd rewrapped the remaining food in the napkin and tucked it carefully into her shoulder bag, saving it, Robert understood, for tomorrow, or the day after. Stretching every bit of food as far as it would go. "Thank you," she said again, meeting Robert's eyes directly. Hers were hazel, he noticed, and despite the exhaustion, they held a fierce light. "You have no idea what this means." Then she was gone, navigating through the tables toward the door, the baby's head resting against her shoulder. Robert watched her disappear into the Chicago evening, and for the first time in 15 years, the gray fog that surrounded him seemed to thin just slightly. He sat there for another 20 minutes, his untouched wine growing warm, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The way she'd knelt without hesitation, the way she'd fed her son with such care, the way she'd looked at the child, as if he was the only thing in the world that mattered. Finally, Robert paid his bill, adding a tip large enough to make the server's eyes widen, and walked out into the night. His penthouse apartment waited for him, 30 floors above the city, filled with expensive furniture and profound silence. He rode the elevator up, unlocked his door, and stood in the entryway of his empty home. The penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan from 42 floors up, 6,000 square feet of curated perfection that felt more like a museum than a home. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living portrait. Rothko, Diebenkorn, and other investment pieces hung on the walls, chosen by decorators, because Robert had long since stopped caring. Empty, all of it empty. He stood in the marble kitchen, poured 25-year-old Macallan into a crystal tumbler he wouldn't drink from, then carried it to the windows. Chicago glittered below, clean, orderly, purposeful from a distance. He knew the illusion too well. His mind replayed the restaurant, the young woman's exhausted face, the baby's startled joy at warm mashed potatoes, the way she'd blown on each spoonful with a tenderness that made something dormant in him twitch awake. A reminder of what it used to feel like to care. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, an old man, not by age but by erosion. Grief had carved him hollow long before he turned 62. The foundation he'd built after Margaret and Sophie died did good work, scholarships, STEM programs, support for foster youth, but he had moved through it all like a ghost signing checks. Tonight had been different, tonight had felt real. He turned away from the view and wandered through rooms lit only by city glow, spaces too large, too polished, too silent. In the bedroom he lay down fully clothed on the luxury mattress that always felt like an expensive coffin. He stared at the ceiling and saw only the woman and her child. Where were they sleeping? Were they warm? Would she have to beg for leftovers again tomorrow? When sleep finally came, it was fractured. Sophie's laughter echoed down long empty halls. Margaret's perfume drifted through his dreams, no longer distinct, just the memory of something floral swallowed by cleaning products. And beneath it all, the baby's delighted gurgle at the taste of mashed potatoes. Morning arrived the same way it always did, with mechanical precision. 6 a.m. alarm, gym on the 41st floor, treadmill, weights, stretches he barely attempted. Then a shower in a bathroom full of luxuries that didn't make him feel any less tired, any less numb, any more alive. But the image of that mother and child followed him from room to room, and for the first time in 15 years, the numbness cracked, not with joy, not with hope, but with the unmistakable ache of someone remembering what it meant to feel responsible for another human being. 8 a.m., dressed in clothes that cost more than that woman's entire wardrobe probably. Sitting in his kitchen with coffee from a machine that had cost $3,000, reading the Wall Street Journal and retaining nothing. By noon he'd given up the pretense of caring about work. He called his assistant. "Cancel everything for today. Tell them I'm not feeling well." "Are you all right, Mr. Wellington? Should I call Dr. Morrison?" "I'm fine, I just need a day." He hung up before she could ask more questions. Then he did something he hadn't done in years. He went for a walk with no destination in mind. Thursday evening, Robert found himself driving past Marchand, slowing down as he approached, scanning the sidewalks for a young black woman with a baby. Nothing. He told himself to go home, told himself this was ridiculous. But he ended up parking down the block and walking past the restaurant on foot, looking at every face, every figure in the October twilight. Nothing. Friday he did the same thing, drove past, parked, walked, looked, nothing. Saturday afternoon, unable to sit still anymore, Robert decided to walk through Millennium Park. It was something he used to do with Sophie. She'd loved the Cloud Gate sculpture, had called it the giant silver bean and giggled every time they walked underneath it and saw their reflections distorted on its mirrored surface. He hadn't been back since she died. The park was busy with weekend crowds, families, couples, groups of teenagers taking selfies. The October air had that particular crispness that meant winter was coming, that made people walk a little faster and hold their coffee cups a little tighter. Robert walked slowly, hands in his coat pockets, not really seeing where he was going. And then he stopped, because there she was, sitting on a bench near the fountain, the baby, her son in her lap. She had a book open beside her, and Robert's breath caught when he recognized what it was. A textbook. Thick and dense and clearly graduate level. The title was something about financial markets and quantitative analysis. The kind of book that cost $200 new and that finance students at places like Northwestern or University of Chicago pored over with highlighters and sticky notes. She was trying to read while bouncing the baby gently. Her attention kept splitting between the page and her son, who was fussing slightly, squirming in her arms. Robert moved off the main path, positioning himself partially behind a tree, not hiding exactly, just observing, trying to understand. The baby's fussing escalated to full crying. Immediately, without hesitation, the woman closed the book and gave her son her complete attention. She pulled out a bottle from her worn canvas bag, the same bag from the restaurant, and tested the temperature against her wrist before offering it to him. While he drank, she sang, soft and low, meant only for him. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray." Robert's chest tightened. Margaret used to sing that to Sophie. Used to rock her in the nursery at night, singing that same lullaby while Robert listened from the doorway, watching them together, feeling like the luckiest man alive. The baby finished eating. The woman held him up, making exaggerated faces, eyes wide, mouth open, tongue stuck out, until he laughed. That pure uninhibited baby laugh that sounds like joy distilled into sound. She pressed her forehead against his, whispered something Robert couldn't hear from this distance. But he could see the love in every line of her body, the fierce protectiveness, the complete devotion. Then she carefully packed everything back into her bag, the bottle, a small pack of wipes, the textbook carefully wrapped in what looked like a plastic bag to protect it. She stood settling the baby on her hip, and started walking. Robert followed. He told himself it was just to make sure they were safe. Just to see where they were going. Just to understand. But really he didn't know why he was doing it. Couldn't have explained it if someone asked. He only knew that he couldn't let her disappear again without knowing. She walked for 20 minutes. The baby got heavier in her arms. Robert could see it in the slight shift of her posture, the way she kept adjusting her grip, but she never stopped. Never put him down. Just kept walking with that determined stride of someone who'd learned not to let exhaustion show. The neighborhoods changed as they walked. The nice areas near the park gave way to mixed commercial zones, then to older residential streets, where the buildings showed their age, and the cars parked along the curbs were mostly older models with rust spots and duct tape holding mirrors in place. Finally she turned into an alley between two abandoned warehouses. Robert hesitated at the entrance, suddenly aware of how this must look. A wealthy white man following a young black woman into an isolated area. If someone saw this, if she noticed and called the police, but concern overrode caution. He followed. The alley opened into an old parking lot. Scattered around were abandoned cars, husks of vehicles that had been stripped of anything valuable and left to rust. Broken glass glittered in the fading light. Graffiti covered the brick walls of the surrounding buildings, and in the corner, one car that looked different from the others. A 1998 Honda Civic, faded blue paint peeling in patches. Windows fogged from the inside, but clearly lived in. The back window had a blanket hung up as a makeshift curtain. Someone had rigged a small solar panel to the roof, the kind you could buy online for charging phones. The woman walked straight to it, opened the back door, climbed in with the baby. Robert stood in the shadows, his heart pounding, watching as she settled in the back seat. Through the fogged windows, he could see her spreading out a thin blanket, arranging the baby on it. The space was tiny, barely enough room for one person, let alone a woman and an infant. This was her home. She was living in a car, in an abandoned parking lot, with a baby. Robert felt something break open in his chest. Not pity exactly, something deeper and more complicated. Horror at the injustice of it. Rage at a world that let this happen. And underneath it all, a bone-deep recognition that something was fundamentally wrong, and he had to do something about it. He watched as she pulled out that cloth-wrapped food from the restaurant, unwrapped it carefully, ate a small piece of the ribeye, just a few bites, making it last, then wrapped it back up and put it away, saving the rest for tomorrow, planning ahead with whatever tiny scraps of security she could gather. The baby started crying, a thin tired sound that cut through the evening air. She picked him up immediately, cradling him close, rocking him in the cramped space, and she sang, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine, you make me happy when skies are gray." Robert stood there listening to that lullaby echoing in an abandoned parking lot, watching a young woman comfort her son in the back seat of a car that was their only shelter, and felt something he hadn't felt in 15 years. Purpose, not the vague sense of obligation that had driven his foundation work, not the hollow satisfaction of signing checks and attending galas, but real, urgent, visceral purpose. The kind that grabbed you by the throat and wouldn't let go. This was wrong. This brilliant young woman reading graduate-level finance textbooks. This innocent baby who'd smiled with such pure joy at warm mashed potatoes. Both of them living in a car because the world had failed them in ways Robert was only beginning to understand. He couldn't walk away from this. He turned and left the parking lot, but his mind was already racing, already making plans. Already trying to figure out how to help without intruding, without making things worse, without adding to whatever burden she was already carrying. The next morning, Sunday, Robert made a phone call. "David, it's Robert Wellington. I need your help with something sensitive." David Chen had worked as a private investigator for 15 years. Discreet, thorough, the kind of man who could find out anything about anyone without leaving footprints. "What do you need?" "I need you to find someone. But carefully, she can't know she's being investigated." Robert gave him what little information he had. Young black woman, early 20s, has an infant son, currently homeless, living in a blue Honda Civic in a parking lot off South State Street, reading graduate-level finance textbooks. "That's not much to go on," David said. "I know, but David, she graduated from somewhere like Northwestern or University of Chicago. She's educated, intelligent. Something happened to bring her to this point, and I need to know what it was." "Why?" Robert looked out his window at the city spread below him. "All those lights, all those lives. Because I want to help, but I need to understand her situation first." All right, give me 2 weeks, maybe less if I get lucky. Make it fast, David. She's living in a car with a baby. Winter's coming. I'll do my best. Jasmine Turner felt him following before she saw him. 3 months on the street had taught her things she'd never wanted to learn. How to sleep with one eye open. How to tell which strangers were dangerous and which were just indifferent. How to notice the subtle shifts in atmosphere that meant someone was paying attention to you in a way that might not be safe. The sensation of being watched had a particular quality, a prickling on the back of your neck, a change in the air pressure, an instinct honed by generations of women who'd learned to trust their gut because not trusting it could get you hurt or killed. She'd felt it when she left Millennium Park, that awareness of eyes on her back, of footsteps that matched her pace but stayed far enough back to maintain deniability. Jasmine held Marcus closer, her heart rate kicking up despite her attempt to stay calm. Her mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. She couldn't lead him to the car. That was her only shelter. If he knew where she slept, where Marcus slept, they'd be completely vulnerable. She'd have to find somewhere else, and finding safe places to park overnight was already difficult enough without having to start over. But she also couldn't confront him in an empty area. That's how women got hurt. How they ended up as statistics in police reports that other people read over coffee and forgot about by lunchtime. Up ahead, she saw the 24-hour convenience store where Jerome worked security. Bright lights, security cameras visible on the exterior, safety and visibility. Jasmine made her decision. She walked straight to the store and stopped under the brightest street light, directly in front of the security cameras. Then she turned around. The man was about 20 feet back, older, white, 60 or so, wearing an expensive wool coat that probably cost more than everything she owned combined. His hands came up immediately when he saw her turn, palms out in a gesture that was either genuine peace or practiced manipulation. "I'm sorry," he called out. "I didn't mean to frighten you." His voice had that particular quality of privilege, educated, confident, the tone of someone who expected to be listened to. But underneath it, something else, a roughness, like grief had worn grooves in his throat. Still, Jasmine had learned not to trust sad rich men. They were often the most dangerous kind. "Why are you following me?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Good, don't show fear." Fear invited predators. "Because I wanted to make sure you were safe, that you had somewhere to go." "That's not your concern." "You're right, it's not. I apologize." He started to turn away, and Jasmine should have let him, should have taken Marcus and disappeared into the night. That was the smart thing, the safe thing. But something made her speak. Maybe exhaustion, maybe the weight of 3 months carrying every burden alone, maybe just the strange sincerity in his face. "You're the man from the restaurant." Tuesday night, he turned back. In the harsh fluorescent light from the store, she could see his face clearly now. Lined with age, yes, but more than that. Carved with the particular kind of pain that comes from profound loss. His eyes had that hollow look of someone who'd stopped expecting good things to happen a long time ago. "Yes," he said. "My name is Robert Wellington." The name triggered instant recognition. Everyone in Chicago knew Wellington Technologies, knew about the founder who'd become a recluse after his family died in some terrible accident, knew about the billions he'd made, and apparently had no interest in enjoying. "What do you want from me, Mr. Wellington?" Jasmine asked. "Nothing," he said, and the way he said it, flat, honest, almost surprised by his own answer, made her believe him. "I just saw you tonight, in the park, reading that textbook, caring for your son, and I wanted to make sure you were okay." "We're fine." The lie hung in the air between them, obvious to both of them. The store's glass door opened. Jerome stepped out, an older black man with gray in his beard and kind eyes that had seen enough of life to be cautious without being cruel. "Everything all right, miss?" Jerome asked, his attention on Robert, his posture slightly defensive. "Yes," Jasmine said after a moment's hesitation. "Thank you, Jerome." Jerome looked at Robert with the particular assessment of a black man who'd learned to spot trouble in its expensive clothes. Then he nodded slowly and went back to his post, but he stayed visible through the glass, watching. "I should go," Jasmine said. "Wait." Robert took a small step forward, then stopped when he saw her tense. He raised his hands again. "Just let me ask one thing. That textbook you were reading, are you in school?" "I was. I graduated from Northwestern 2 years ago." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, definitely, And something else, respect maybe, recognition. What did you study? Finance and economics, and now you're asking strangers for leftovers in expensive restaurants. Jasmine's jaw tightened, her hands clenched around Marcus a little tighter. Life happens, Mr. Wellington. I'd like to help. Why? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He stood there in the cold October night, this wealthy old man in his expensive coat, and for a long moment he just looked at her with an expression that was almost vulnerable. Because I saw how you fed your son, he said finally. The care you took, the love. It reminded me of something I'd lost, something I thought I'd never feel again. And I think if I can help you, maybe I can find a way back to feeling alive. Jasmine studied his face. She'd gotten very good at reading people over the past 3 months. Good at spotting the ones who wanted something, the ones who'd hurt you if given half a chance, the ones who saw homeless women as prey. This man wasn't any of those things. He was something else entirely. Something she didn't quite have a category for. He was broken, like her, but in a different way. I don't need charity, she said. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering a chance. A way back, whatever you want to call it. What kind of chance? Robert seemed to choose his words carefully. Let me find out what happened. How someone with a finance degree from Northwestern ends up on the streets, and then maybe I can help you get back to where you should be. Every instinct Jasmine had developed over the past 3 months screamed at her to say no, to walk away. Don't trust rich white men who show up out of nowhere with offers of help. Don't accept assistance that comes with invisible strings. Don't let anyone know where you're vulnerable. But Marcus chose that moment to whimper against her chest, and she felt the weight of him in her arms. Felt the thinness of her jacket against the October cold that was only going to get worse. Thought about winter coming. About heating costs she couldn't afford, about the car that barely ran and wouldn't protect them when temperatures dropped below freezing. Thought about that textbook she'd kept through everything. Pawning clothes, her laptop, her phone for an older model, because it represented the dream she refused to let die entirely. No strings, she asked. No strings. I'll think about it, Jasmine said. She started to turn away, but Robert reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card. Wait. Please. He held it out, keeping his distance. This has my cell phone number. If anything happens, if Marcus gets sick, if you need help, anything, call this number. Day or night. I mean that. Jasmine stared at the card. Heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering. Robert Wellington with a phone number and nothing else, no company, no title, like he'd had them made specifically for moments like this. I'm not going to call you, she said, even as her hand reached for the card. I hope you won't need to, Robert said, but just in case. Jasmine took the card and tucked it into her bag without looking at it again. She turned and walked away, Marcus's warm weight against her chest, aware of Robert Wellington's eyes on her back until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. She didn't go to the car. Not yet. Not with him knowing which direction she'd gone. Instead she walked for another 40 minutes, taking random turns, doubling back, making sure no one was following before finally making her way to the parking lot. That night, lying in the back seat with Marcus sleeping fitfully against her, Jasmine pulled out the card and looked at it by the light of her phone. Just a name and a number. She almost threw it away 3 times. Instead she tucked it into the inner pocket of her bag where she kept important things. Marcus's birth certificate, her college diploma, her mother's photograph, just in case. 2 weeks later, Robert sat in his study with a manila folder in front of him, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, his hands were shaking. David Chen had been thorough. The folder was thick with information, printouts of documents, photographs, interview notes, background checks, a person's entire life, reduced to data points and paper trails. Robert's hands hovered over the folder, suddenly struck by the weight of what he was about to do. Opening this would make him complicit in invading Jasmine's privacy, would give him access to her history, her secrets, her pain without her permission. But he'd already commissioned the investigation, already paid for the information, already crossed that particular line. The knowing was inevitable now. The only question was what he'd do with it. He opened the folder. The first page was a photograph. Jasmine's college graduation photo from Northwestern University's website, 2 years old. She looked so different then. Younger obviously, but more than that. There was hope in her face, light in her eyes. The smile was genuine. reaching all the way to her eyes, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who still believed good things were possible. Next came her academic record. 3.8 GPA, Dean's List all 4 years. Full scholarship recipient. The Harold Washington Scholarship for students from underserved Chicago communities who demonstrated exceptional academic promise. Graduated magna cum laude, double major in finance and economics. Robert felt a strange pride reading it, even though he'd had nothing to do with her achievements. This brilliant young woman, overcoming whatever circumstances she'd come from to excel at one of the country's top universities. David's report continued with what he'd been able to piece together. Investigation took 2 weeks. Started with the car registration. Found the Honda Civic registered to Jasmine Marie Turner. From there I could access public records. Northwestern Alumni Database gave me graduation year, degree. LinkedIn had her brief employment history at Hendricks & Moore Financial Services. She was hired straight out of college as a financial analyst. Starting salary $65,000, good for entry level. That much is public record. She was there 6 months before being terminated. The harder part was finding someone willing to talk. I contacted 23 former Hendricks & Moore employees. 22 refused or didn't respond. The 23rd agreed to talk off the record. Wouldn't even give me her name. But what she told me was enough. Robert read the notes from the anonymous interview carefully. Jasmine was involved with another analyst, Derek Morrison, senior to her by 2 years. From a wealthy family, his father Thomas Morrison sits on Hendricks & Moore's board of directors. When Jasmine got pregnant, Morrison panicked, told her to take care of it. When she refused, he went to his father. 2 weeks later, Jasmine was terminated. Official reason: theft of confidential client information. According to my source, there was never any real evidence. Just accusations from Morrison claiming she was planning to sell proprietary data to competitors. The source said, quote, "It was complete bullshit. Jasmine was meticulous about security. She wouldn't even discuss client details in the break room. They railroaded her." Morrison left for New York 3 weeks after Jasmine's termination. New position at Goldman Sachs. Significant salary increase. David had added his own analysis. I couldn't get access to internal HR files or actual performance reviews. Those are sealed and would require subpoena power. But the pattern is clear. Brilliant young analyst gets pregnant by the boss's son. Suddenly terminated for cause with accusations that effectively blacklist her in the industry. The father moves on to a better job, while she's left unable to find work. The next section covered Jasmine's attempts to rebuild. Hospital records from Cook County showed Marcus Anthony Turner had been born 4 months ago. Healthy despite his mother's circumstances. Mother listed her address as temporary on the birth certificate. Father's name blank. Financial analysis showed Jasmine had applied to 73 positions in the past 4 months. 11 interview requests. 0 job offers. Background checks reveal the Hendricks & Moore termination. David had written, references either refuse to comment or give responses that damn her through omission. She's been effectively blacklisted. Current situation: living in 1998 Honda Civic, moves parking locations every few days to avoid police attention, subsists on food banks, church meals, and occasional cash work when she can find childcare. With winter approaching and an infant to care for, situation is critical. Robert closed the folder and sat back in his chair. Outside his window, Chicago glittered in the darkness. All those lights representing lives being lived, problems being solved, families being warm and safe and fed. And somewhere down there, a brilliant young woman with a finance degree from Northwestern was living in a car with her infant son because one man had lied and one system had failed her and the world had decided she didn't deserve a second chance. Robert stood and walked to his window. His reflection stared back at him. An old man in an expensive apartment, surrounded by success that meant nothing. What was he going to do with this information? The answer came to him with surprising clarity: whatever it took to make this right. He picked up his phone. "David, it's Robert. I need you to do something else. Find out everything you can about Derek Morrison and Richard Chen. Any current contact information, professional history, everything. If there's documentation about what happened, I want to know about it. Planning something." "Justice," Robert said. "I'm planning justice. After he hung up, Robert stood by the window for a long time, thinking about Jasmine's face in that graduation photo. About the hope that had been stolen from her. About a system that protected men like Morrison while destroying women like her. He couldn't give her back what she'd lost. Couldn't undo the past 18 months. Couldn't erase the trauma of living in a car with a baby, of having to beg for food, of being treated like she was invisible by a world that had once told her she was exceptional. But he could give her a chance. A real chance. A way forward, if she'd trust him enough to take it. The call came at 1:17 in the morning. Robert's phone buzzed on his nightstand, pulling him out of a restless sleep full of fragments he couldn't quite remember. He answered on the first ring. His body trained by years of running a company to wake instantly at unexpected calls. Mr. Wellington. The voice was young, female, shaking badly. It took him a second to place it. Jasmine. I'm so sorry to call. I'm so sorry. I didn't know who else to call. And Marcus is sick, he's really sick, and I don't know what to do, and I'm scared. Her voice broke on the last word, dissolving into something close to panic, and Robert was already out of bed. Already reaching for clothes with one hand while holding the phone with the other. Slow down. Tell me what's happening. He has a fever, a really high fever, and he's having trouble breathing. I took him to county, but they said without insurance it would be 4 to 6 hours before anyone could see him, and he's so hot and he's making this sound when he breathes. And I don't know what to do. Where are you right now? The convenience store, near where we met before. I didn't want to be alone in the parking lot. Jerome is here, he's the security guard, but I don't know what to do, and Marcus is so sick. I'm coming. Right now. Stay exactly where you are. I'll be there in 10 minutes. But Jasmine. I'm coming. Stay there. He hung up and finished dressing in record time, throwing on the first clothes he touched, jeans, a sweater, the wool coat he'd been wearing the night he followed her, keys, wallet, phone. Out the door. The elevator took forever. Robert stood in it watching the floor numbers descend with agonizing slowness, his heart hammering against his ribs in a way it hadn't in years. He was terrified in a way that felt both foreign and intimately familiar, the particular terror of knowing a child was in danger and being unable to fix it immediately. His car was in the building's garage. He'd barely driven it in months, but it started immediately. German engineering, worth every cent of its 6-figure price tag if it meant getting to Jasmine faster. The streets were nearly empty at this hour. Robert ran 2 red lights and broke the speed limit by 30 miles per hour, not caring. Not even thinking about it. Just driving with single-minded focus toward a convenience store on the south side, where a young woman was terrified and alone and needed help. He made it in 7 minutes. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store cast harsh shadows across the parking lot. Robert saw her immediately. Standing under the brightest light, Marcus in her arms, rocking him continuously, with that unconscious motion of a mother trying to soothe a sick child. Even from a distance, he could see something was wrong. Marcus's small body was limp, his head lolling against Jasmine's shoulder. His breathing made a sound, a slight wheeze, a whistle, that Robert could hear even before he got close. Let me see him, Robert said, reaching for the baby. Jasmine hesitated. In her eyes Robert saw the calculation, the fear of trusting a man she barely knew with her child's life, weighed against the terror of what might happen if she didn't. It was a choice no mother should have to make, and the fact that she had to make it at all was its own kind of tragedy. She placed Marcus in his arms. The baby was frighteningly hot. Robert could feel the fever through the thin blanket, radiating off Marcus's small body in waves. His breathing was rapid and shallow, his chest moving too fast, the sound whistling slightly with each breath. How long has he had the fever? Since this afternoon. But it got worse about 2 hours ago. I tried everything, cold cloths, keeping him hydrated, but nothing's working. He won't eat, he barely responds when I talk to him. And his breathing, her voice broke again. She was trying so hard to stay calm, to be strong, but Robert could see the terror underneath. This was her son, her whole world, and he was sick enough that even she, with all her strength and determination, couldn't fix it alone. Get in my car, Robert said. We're going to Northwestern Memorial, now. But they'll want insurance information, and I don't have Jasmine. Robert turned to face her fully, making sure she could see his face, his certainty. Northwestern Memorial has to treat emergency conditions. It's federal law. E.M. Taylor. Any emergency room has to stabilize life-threatening situations, regardless of ability to pay. And this, he looked down at Marcus's labored breathing. This qualifies. They'll treat him first, worry about paperwork later. Jasmine nodded, her jaw tight with fear and determination. She climbed into the passenger seat of Robert's Mercedes. The contrast was almost painful. This woman who'd been living in a car, now sitting in leather seats that cost more than most people's monthly rent, holding her sick baby, and trying not to fall apart. The drive to Northwestern Memorial took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Robert kept one hand on the wheel, and one hand near Marcus, as if his proximity could somehow make the baby better. He murmured things that were more prayer than speech. "Stay with us, little man. Hang on. We're almost there. You're going to be okay." Beside him, Jasmine sat rigid, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She was praying too. Robert realized. Her lips moved with words he couldn't hear, but he recognized the posture, the desperation, the bargaining with whatever higher power might be listening. Please God, please God, please God. He'd done the same thing 15 years ago, sitting in a different car, racing toward this same hospital, hearing that same internal chant. The memory rose up so vividly it almost choked him. The crushing fear, the desperate hope, the certainty that if he just got there fast enough, if he just believed hard enough, everything would be okay. It hadn't been okay then. Margaret and Sophie had been gone before he'd even reached the hospital, their injuries too severe, the drunk driver's impact too brutal. But this time could be different. Had to be different. They pulled up to the emergency entrance. Robert was out of the car before it fully stopped, Marcus cradled against his chest, Jasmine scrambling out behind him. The emergency room was busy despite the late hour, flu season starting, the usual mix of accidents and emergencies that fill hospitals in the small hours of the morning. A drunk man bleeding from a head wound, an elderly woman breathing oxygen, a teenager with a swollen ankle, people in various stages of distress, all waiting for their turn to be seen. Robert walked straight to the triage desk. The nurse looked up, her expression already forming into the practiced patience of someone who dealt with panicked parents every night. Then she saw Marcus. Her eyes went to the baby's gray-tinged skin, his labored breathing, the way his small chest heaved with effort. Her hand moved to the phone, before she consciously decided to act. "I need a pediatric team to triage. Infant with respiratory distress, approximately 9 months old." She looked at Jasmine. "How long has he been like this?" "Fever since this afternoon. Got much worse about 2 hours ago. He's had some congestion, been fussy, refusing to eat." "Any vomiting? Diarrhea?" "No." "Has he been around anyone sick?" "I don't think so. We haven't been around many people." The nurse's eyes took in Jasmine's worn clothes, her exhausted face, the way she held herself like someone who'd been carrying too much weight for too long. Understanding flickered across her expression, but she just nodded and made notes. A team appeared, 2 nurses and a doctor, all moving with the practiced speed of people who knew every second mattered. The doctor took Marcus from Robert's arms with efficient gentleness. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, pediatric emergency medicine. How long has he had the fever?" Jasmine answered, her voice shaking but clear, giving them everything they needed: symptoms, timeline, when the breathing difficulties started, what she'd tried, what had helped and what hadn't. "We're taking him back right now," Dr. Mitchell said. "Respiratory distress takes priority. You'll need to fill out admission paperwork, but we'll work on him while you do that." They disappeared through double doors with Marcus, moving fast, and Jasmine stood there staring after them, with an expression that Robert recognized in his bones. That particular terror of having your child taken away from you by people in scrubs, of being left behind in a waiting room while unknown things happen behind closed doors. An administrator appeared with a clipboard and an expression of professional sympathy. "I'll need to get some information. Do you have insurance?" "No." Jasmine's voice was flat. "I don't have insurance, I don't have money, but I'll pay however long it takes. I'll work it off, I'll sign whatever you need." Just please help my son." The administrator's expression softened. "Ma'am, under EMTALA, that's the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, we're required to provide emergency treatment, regardless of ability to pay. Your son is being cared for right now, we'll figure out the billing later. First let's just get basic information. What's your son's name?" "Marcus Anthony Turner." "And your name?" "Jasmine Marie Turner." They went through the paperwork. Address. Jasmine hesitated, then gave the convenience store's address. Emergency contacts none. Medical history, healthy, no allergies known, up to date on vaccines despite everything. When it was done, the administrator gave Jasmine a small genuine smile. "He's in good hands. Dr. Mitchell is one of our best pediatric emergency doctors. Someone will come update you as soon as they have information." Jasmine nodded, unable to speak, and walked toward the waiting area on legs that didn't seem entirely under her control. Robert guided her to a chair. She sat down heavily, as if her strings had been cut. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she looked impossibly young, more like a scared kid herself than a mother dealing with a medical emergency. "He's going to be okay," Robert said, sitting beside her. "You don't know that. I know this is one of the best pediatric hospitals in the state. I know they saw immediately how serious it was and got him into treatment right away. I know they have the equipment and expertise to handle whatever's wrong." Jasmine wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the overheated hospital air. Robert took off his coat and put it around her shoulders. It was too big, swallowing her small frame, but she pulled it tight and buried her face in the wool. "My wife and daughter were brought here," Robert said quietly, "after their accident. 15 years ago, the staff here, they fight for every life. They'll fight for Marcus." Jasmine turned to look at him. Really look at him, and saw the grief carved into his face like words etched in stone. Saw the way his hands shook slightly, saw the fear in his eyes that mirrored her own. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Me too." They sat in silence after that. The waiting room had a particular quality at this hour, liminal, suspended between night and day, full of people in various stages of fear and exhaustion. The TV mounted in the corner played infomercials no one watched. The vending machines hummed. A clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second an eternity. 43 minutes passed. Robert counted every one. When Dr. Mitchell finally came through the double doors, Jasmine stood so fast she swayed. Robert stood too, his hand instinctively going to her elbow to steady her. "Miss Turner," Dr. Mitchell smiled, and that smile was everything. "Your son is going to be fine. He has bronchiolitis. It's a viral infection of the small airways in the lungs, very common in infants. His fever has come down significantly with medication, and we've started him on IV fluids for dehydration. His oxygen levels are improving."
He.
Jasmine made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Her legs gave out entirely. Robert caught her, easing her back into the chair. "Can I see him?" Jasmine asked, tears streaming down her face. "Of course. He's still sleeping, but you can sit with him. We want to keep him overnight for observation, but I expect he'll be ready to go home tomorrow afternoon." "Home," Jasmine repeated, and the word hung there between them, weighted with all the things it didn't mean for her and Marcus. After Jasmine disappeared through the doors to be with Marcus, Robert sat back down in the waiting room. His hands were shaking badly now, adrenaline draining away and leaving him feeling hollowed out. For a terrible few minutes in the car, driving through the dark with Marcus's labored breathing filling the silence, Robert had been back in this exact hospital 15 years ago. Same fluorescent lights, same antiseptic smell, same crushing fear that he was about to lose someone irreplaceable. But this time, the child had lived. Robert put his face in his hands and let himself shake. An hour later, Jasmine came back and sat down beside him. She looked wrung out but calmer. "He's sleeping. They have him hooked up to all these monitors, but he looks so much better already. His breathing is easier, his color is better. He even opened his eyes when I talked to him." "Good," Robert said. "That's good." They sat quietly for a moment, then Jasmine said, "How did you know? How did you know to bring him here instead of county?" "Because I've been here before. Because I know this hospital, know these doctors. Because when my daughter," his voice caught. He tried again.
Because I know they care about saving lives more than they care about paperwork. I'm sorry, Jasmine said again. About your family. Thank you, Mr. Wellington. Robert, please. Robert, she took a breath. You said you'd had me investigated, that you knew what happened. It wasn't a question, but Robert nodded anyway. Yes, I hired a private investigator. I'm sorry I didn't ask permission first, but I needed to understand your situation before I could figure out how to help. What did you find out? So Robert told her about Derek Morrison and his father, about the fabricated accusations, about the termination and blacklisting, about how impossible it had been for her to find work afterward. Jasmine listened without interrupting, her face carefully blank. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Why are you telling me this? She finally asked. Because I want to help, really help, not just money, though I can provide that too if you'll let me, but help getting you back to where you should be. You're brilliant, Jasmine. You have a degree from Northwestern. You were exceptional at your job. You shouldn't be living in a car because one man lied and one system failed you. Why do you care? The question was almost aggressive. You don't know me. Why does any of this matter to you?
Robert thought about how to answer. About Margaret and Sophie. About 15 years of going through motions. About that moment in the restaurant when he'd seen Jasmine feed Marcus with such fierce tenderness and felt something crack open in his chest. Because for 15 years I've been half dead, he said finally. Going through the motions of living without actually feeling anything. Building wealth I don't need. Living in an apartment that feels like a very expensive coffin. Then I saw you with Marcus, saw the way you loved him, the way you cared for him despite having nothing, and I remembered what it feels like to care about something. He looked at her directly. If I can help you, maybe I can find my way back to being alive. So yes, I'm doing this for you, but I'm also doing it for me. Does that make sense? Jasmine studied his face for a long moment. What do you want in return? Nothing. Just let me help. Let me get you into stable housing, help you connect with resources, maybe help you find employment. After that, it's up to you how much or how little you want me involved. I can't just accept charity. I need to pay you back. Then we'll work out a payment plan. Whatever makes you comfortable. But Jasmine, winter is coming. Living in a car with an infant in Chicago winter is dangerous. You almost lost him tonight. Don't let pride keep you from accepting help. Jasmine's jaw clenched. Tears spilled over despite her obvious attempt to hold them back. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to trust people anymore. I know, Robert said gently, and I'm not asking you to trust me completely, just enough to let me help. We'll figure the rest out as we go. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, straightened her spine, nodded once. Okay, we'll try, but I'm keeping track of everything, every cent, and when I can I pay it all back. Deal, Robert said. Neither of them knew it then, sitting in a hospital waiting room at 3 in the morning, exhausted and scared and choosing to trust despite every reason not to. But that was the moment when their lives truly began to change. Not because of money, not because of resources or connections, but because two broken people had looked at each other and chosen to see each other's humanity and respond to it. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sometimes that's everything. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors that creaked slightly when you walked and windows that let in morning light the color of honey. To Jasmine, walking through it for the first time with Marcus on her hip, it felt like stepping into someone else's life. It's too much, she said, even as her eyes traced the clean walls, the functioning radiator, the locks on the doors that actually worked. It's safe, Robert countered. It's warm, winter's coming, and you need somewhere Marcus can be protected from the cold. Jasmine ran her hand along the kitchen counter, real granite, smooth and cool under her fingers. The sink had hot water. She'd tested it 3 times already, unable to believe water could come out that hot without having to boil it first on a camping stove. I'll pay you back, she said, her voice tight with the weight of owing something this enormous. Every cent, however long it takes. We'll work out a payment plan, Robert said. Something manageable. I need to see it in writing, Jasmine said. Her voice was firm despite the exhaustion. A contract. Monthly payment amount. Interest rate. I'll pay interest. Due date. Everything official. Jasmine. No. She cut him off. If I'm going to do this, I need it to be a loan, not charity. I need to know exactly what I owe and how I'm going to pay it back. Otherwise I can't accept. Robert studied her face and saw the steel beneath the exhaustion. This wasn't negotiable for her. This was about dignity. Okay, he said. I'll have my lawyer draw up a proper loan agreement. 0% interest. I'm not profiting off your situation, but monthly payments, clear terms, everything documented. Fair, Jasmine agreed, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Marcus reached toward the window toward a sunbeam that cut across the living room in a rectangle of gold. Light, he said. One of his few words, and his small hand opened and closed trying to grasp the brightness. Yeah baby, Jasmine whispered. Light. The contract arrived 2 days later. Jasmine read every word 3 times before signing. Robert had been generous. The monthly payment was low enough to be manageable even on her uncertain income. The term was long enough that she wouldn't be crushed by it, but it was real, legal, a debt she could track and repay. She signed it and felt something release in her chest. This wasn't charity, this was a business arrangement she could eventually pay back. They moved in that weekend. Robert had arranged for furniture, practical pieces, nothing extravagant. A bed for Jasmine with a frame and a real mattress, not the thin padding she'd been sleeping on in the car. A crib for Marcus with proper bedding and safety rails. A couch that didn't have suspicious stains. A small dining table with 2 chairs. Jasmine added her own touches. The cloth she'd used to wrap that first meal from Marchand, washed and folded carefully on a shelf in the kitchen like a talisman. The finance textbook from the park, standing upright on the bookshelf Robert had brought, its spine cracked from use but still intact. Marcus's toys, few as they were, arranged in a small basket in the corner of the living room. The first night in the apartment Jasmine couldn't sleep. She kept getting up to check the locks, to look in on Marcus in his crib, to walk through rooms that were hers, at least temporarily. The silence felt strange after months of sleeping in a car where every sound outside could mean danger. Here the quiet felt safe, protected. At 3 in the morning she stood in the kitchen and let herself cry. Not from sadness, from relief so overwhelming it felt like drowning. Marcus had a warm place to sleep. She had a bathroom with a shower that worked. They had food in the refrigerator, actual food that she hadn't had to beg for or stretch to last 3 days. She cried until her chest hurt and her eyes burned, and then she washed her face in a sink with hot water and went back to bed. The rejections arrived by email, mostly. Impersonal form letters that might as well have been computer-generated for all the humanity they contained. Thank you for your interest in our company. After careful consideration, we have decided to pursue other candidates whose qualifications more closely match our current needs. Jasmine read each one sitting at the small dining table, her laptop open in front of her, a refurbished model Robert had helped her purchase, and Marcus playing on a blanket nearby. She kept a spreadsheet tracking her applications. Position, company, date applied, response. The columns filled up with no and rejected and no response until looking at it made her chest tight with frustration. 53 applications in 3 months, 7 interviews, 0 offers, every interview the same pattern. They'd be impressed by her resume. Northwestern, excellent GPA, strong references from professors. Then they'd ask about her work history, about the Gap, about Hendricks and more. I see you were terminated after 6 months. Can you explain what happened? When she told the truth about Morrison, about the false accusations, about being blacklisted, she could watch their expressions shift. The subtle lean back in their chairs, the way their eyes went from engaged to evaluating. The mental calculations about risk and liability and whether hiring someone with baggage was worth the potential trouble. When she didn't tell the truth, tried to gloss over it or redirect, background checks revealed everything anyway. A week later, another rejection email. One evening, sitting at her laptop after Marcus had gone to bed, Jasmine felt something inside her start to crack. She'd been so careful, so strong, holding it together because she had to, because Marcus needed her to. But staring at her spreadsheet, at all those rejections, at the dwindling balance in her checking account, she felt the weight of it crushing down. She called Robert. It was late, almost 10, but he answered on the second ring. Jasmine, is everything okay? Is Marcus all right? He's fine. He's sleeping. Her voice broke. I can't do this. I've applied to every financial analyst position in Chicago. I've expanded to consulting firms, to corporate finance departments, to banks. No one will hire me. They all see the termination from Hendricks and more and decide I'm too risky. Have you thought about working somewhere that already knows the truth? Robert asked carefully. Somewhere that could see past the accusations to your actual capabilities. You mean your company? I mean Wellington Enterprises. Yes, but Jasmine, I'm not offering you a job. I retired years ago. I don't make hiring decisions, but I know the current CEO, Harold Buchanan. If you're interested, I could pass along your resume. What he does with it is entirely up to him. Jasmine was quiet. Every instinct told her accepting help like this was wrong, that she needed to get hired on her own merit, not through connections. But she thought about her spreadsheet, about 7 interviews and 0 offers, about the fact that her 6-month lease agreement would eventually end and she'd need to be able to afford rent on her own. Just pass along my resume, she asked. That's all. Harold doesn't hire people as favors. He's too smart for that and too protective of the company. If he brings you in for an interview, it's because your qualifications impressed him. If he hires you, it's because you earned it. Okay, Jasmine said. Thank you. 2 days later her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize. Miss Turner, this is Harold Buchanan, CEO of Wellington Enterprises. Robert Wellington passed along your resume. I'd like to schedule an interview for an entry-level financial analyst position in our infrastructure investment division. Would Wednesday at 10 work for you? Jasmine's heart hammered against her ribs. Yes, absolutely. Thank you. She spent the next 2 days preparing with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. She researched Wellington Enterprises until she could recite their investment portfolio from memory, read every public filing from the past 3 years, studied Harold Buchanan's background, former investment banker, brought in to modernize Wellington Enterprises after Robert's retirement, known for being brilliant and demanding. Wednesday morning, she dressed in the one professional outfit she still owned, navy suit, white blouse, both carefully preserved through months of homelessness because she'd refused to give up hope entirely. She dropped Marcus at the subsidized daycare, kissed his forehead, and took 2 buses to the gleaming tower that housed Wellington Enterprises. The lobby was all marble and glass, the kind of space designed to intimidate. Jasmine walked through it with her head high, refusing to feel small. Harold Buchanan's office was on the 42nd floor. He was in his mid-50s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a handshake that assessed you in that first grip. His office had a wall of windows overlooking the city, and Jasmine tried not to think about how different this view was from the parking lot where she'd been living just weeks ago. Thank you for meeting with me, Jasmine said, sitting in the leather chair across from his desk. I've read your resume carefully, Harold said, not bothering with small talk. Northwestern graduate, strong academic record, excellent performance reviews at Hendricks and Moore, then termination for alleged theft of proprietary information. He looked at her directly. Tell me what really happened. So Jasmine did. She told him about Derek Morrison, about the pregnancy, about the false accusations that came 2 weeks after she refused to handle the situation the way he wanted, about being terminated without real evidence, about being blacklisted in the industry. Harold listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When she finished he said, "What would you do differently if you could go back?" "Document everything," Jasmine said immediately. "Every conversation, every project. Build a paper trail that would make false accusations impossible to sustain." I was naive. I thought competence and hard work would be enough protection. I learned they're not. What did you learn? That the world isn't fair. That privilege protects some people while destroying others. But that doesn't mean you stop trying. It means you get smarter about how you fight. Harold nodded slowly. Tell me about the McKinsey merger analysis you contributed to at Hendricks and Moore. Your supervisor's review said you identified a valuation flaw the senior analysts had missed. For the next 40 minutes, they talked finance, risk assessment, market analysis, the way numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. This was Jasmine's element. This was where all those nights reading textbooks by flashlight in a car paid off. When the interview ended, Harold stood and shook her hand. "I'll be in touch." Jasmine left the building not knowing whether she'd done well or failed completely. She picked up Marcus from daycare, held him close, and tried not to hope too hard. 2 days later, Harold called. "Miss Turner, I'd like to offer you the position. $75,000 annual salary. Full benefits including health insurance, on-site childcare available at subsidized rates. If you're interested, the position is yours." Jasmine had to sit down. "Mr. Buchanan, I thank you. Yes, absolutely yes. Good. You start Monday. And Miss Turner, I want to be clear about something. Robert Wellington recommended you." "Yes,
But I didn't hire you because of that recommendation. I hired you because your qualifications are excellent and because I think you'll be an asset to this company. Don't let anyone, including yourself, suggest otherwise. I understand, thank you." After she hung up, Jasmine sat on her couch holding her phone and crying. Not delicate tears, big, ugly, gasping sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus toddled over, concerned, and she pulled him into her lap and held him while she cried. "We did it, baby," she whispered into his hair. "We're going to be okay." The first year at Wellington Enterprises was the hardest work of Jasmine's life. She arrived at 7:30 every morning, a full hour before anyone else on her team. She stayed until 6 most evenings, leaving only when the daycare closed. She volunteered for every difficult project, double-checked every analysis, worked with a precision and intensity that bordered on compulsive. Her co-workers were skeptical at first. She heard the whispers in the break room, saw the sidelong glances, knew what they were thinking, that she'd gotten the job through connections, that Robert Wellington had pulled strings, that she wasn't really qualified. So she worked harder, let her analysis speak for itself, kept her head down and her standards high and her emotional walls firmly in place. By month 4 she'd identified a significant error in a consultant's report about renewable energy investments. The consultant had used outdated cost projections for solar panel installations, making certain projects look more profitable than they actually were. Jasmine's analysis showed the company would lose nearly $1.3 million over 5 years if they proceeded based on the flawed report. Her team lead took her findings to Harold. They corrected course, avoiding a substantial loss. Harold called her into his office. "Good work on the solar analysis. That's the kind of attention to detail we need." "Thank you, sir." "Stop calling me sir. Harold is fine." He leaned back in his chair. "Jasmine, I'm going to be honest with you. You're exceeding expectations, significantly. Normally I'd wait a full year before considering promotion, but I'm moving you to senior analyst effective next month." Jasmine blinked. That's only 8 months. "I know, it's fast, but your work justifies it. The solar analysis wasn't a fluke. I've been watching. You're consistently the first one to spot problems, the last one to leave, and the most thorough analyst on your team. That's senior level work. The title should match the performance." He paused. "And before you worry about what people will say, yes, some colleagues will assume you got promoted because of Robert's recommendation. Let them think that. The work will speak for itself. It always does." By month 8 she was promoted to senior analyst. The whispers started, as Harold had predicted. But Jasmine kept her head down and her standards high, and within 3 months even the skeptics had to admit she'd earned it. By the end of year 1 she was leading a small team on emerging market analysis. Her colleagues had stopped whispering, started asking her opinion in meetings, treated her like what she was, someone who'd earned her place through competence and hard work. During this time, Robert kept careful distance. He never came to the office, never asked about her work, just texted every few weeks. "How are you? How's Marcus?" and occasionally stopped by her apartment with dinner and spent an hour playing with Marcus while Jasmine caught up on dishes or laundry or just sat and breathed. One evening, watching Robert build an elaborate tower of blocks while Marcus shrieked with delight and knocked them down, Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. "He's gotten so big," Robert said, smiling as Marcus toddled over with a block clutched in his fist, demanding Robert build again. "Almost 2 years now," Jasmine said, "learning new words every day. This morning he pointed at his shoes and said out, clear as anything, he wanted to go to the park. Did you take him? For an hour before work. He's obsessed with the swings." Robert looked at Marcus with an expression that was complicated, joy and grief tangled together. "Sophie loved the swings too. We used to go to the park near our house every Saturday morning. She'd swing for hours if we let her." It was the first time Robert had volunteered information about his daughter. Jasmine stayed quiet, letting him talk if he wanted to. She had this giggle, Robert continued softly. When she was really happy, really delighted by something, she'd do this full-body laugh that made her whole face scrunch up. "I haven't thought about that in years. I couldn't think about it. It hurt too much. But watching Marcus laugh just now, I remembered, and it didn't hurt as much as it used to." "That's good," Jasmine said gently. "Remembering the joy, not just the loss, that's healing." "Is it?" "I think so." My mama used to say that grief is love with nowhere to go. Maybe healing is finding new places for that love to live. Not replacing what you lost, just making room for new love alongside the old. Robert was quiet for a long moment. When did you lose your mother? I was 4. House fire. She got me out but went back for my little brother. Neither of them made it. God, Jasmine, I'm so sorry. My aunt raised me after that. She did her best with what she had, which wasn't much. She's the one who pushed me to apply to college, to believe I could be something more. She died my sophomore year. Heart attack. Sudden. So you've been alone since then? Pretty much, until Marcus. And now I have you too, I guess. You do, Robert said firmly. For whatever that's worth, it's worth a lot, Jasmine said quietly. Later that evening, after Robert left and Marcus was asleep, Jasmine stood by Marcus's crib watching him breathe, his small chest rising and falling, his hand curled into a fist near his face. She thought about Robert's grief, about how it had carved him hollow, about how helping her had started to fill those empty spaces. Healing wasn't something you did alone, it was something you did together, showing up for each other especially when it was hard. The crisis came in year 2. Month 8, Jasmine was in her office when her assistant knocked, a young woman named Claire, who always looked slightly nervous. Harold needs you in the executive conference room. Now, he said it's urgent. Jasmine grabbed her laptop and ran. The conference room was packed with senior executives, their faces grim. Harold stood at the head of the table, and Robert sat in the corner. Unusual, since he rarely came to the office anymore. What's happening? Jasmine asked, sliding into an empty chair. Harold pulled up a presentation. Titan Industries has been quietly accumulating our stock for the past 6 months. They're preparing to launch a hostile takeover bid. If they succeed, they'll dismantle the company and sell off the divisions separately. The room erupted in worried discussion, voices talking over each other, panic spreading like a contagion. How much stock do they have? Someone asked. 42%. They need 51. They're close enough that we have to assume the bid is coming within weeks. Harold outlined defensive strategies, poison pill provisions, white knight investors, stock buyback programs. Each option had significant drawbacks: massive debt, loss of operational control, shareholder lawsuits. Jasmine listened carefully, her mind working through scenarios. She'd spent the past year studying corporate strategy, analyzing market positioning, understanding how companies competed and survived. Something about this situation felt familiar. After the meeting ended and people filed out, still discussing options, Jasmine stayed behind. Robert noticed. So did Harold. You're thinking something, Harold said. I can see it on your face. Can I have 24 hours? Jasmine asked. I want to research Titan more carefully before I say anything. We don't have much time. I know. 24 hours, that's all I need. Harold nodded. Do it. Jasmine worked through the night. She pulled every piece of public information on Titan Industries: financial statements, investment portfolios, shareholder reports, analyst coverage. By 3 in the morning, she had it. The next afternoon, she requested a meeting with Harold and the M&A team. Thomas Gardner, head of M&A, was a man in his 50s who'd been doing deals since before Jasmine was born. I've been analyzing Titan, Jasmine began, pulling up her presentation. They're strong in traditional infrastructure, roads, bridges, water systems, but they're weak in renewable energy and technology. They want Wellington because we have the future-facing investments they lack. That's their strategic motivation. She clicked to the next slide. But they have a vulnerability. Their renewable energy subsidiary, Titan Clean Power, is losing money, badly, mismanaged. Based on my analysis of their filings, they're burning through approximately $8 million annually. The division has lost $33 million over 4 years. Thomas Gardner leaned forward. Where are you going with this? What if instead of just defending against Titan, we made a strategic countermove? What if we publicly announced our interest in acquiring Titan Clean Power? It would force them to choose: continue pursuing us while defending their own subsidiary, or abandon the takeover to protect their assets. Gardner studied her analysis. This is interesting, but executing something like this would be complex. We'd need financing, regulatory approval, due diligence, and we'd need to move fast. I know, Jasmine said. That's why I'm bringing it to you. I'm a director. I don't have the experience to run a deal this complicated. But I thought the strategic insight might help. Harold looked at Gardner. Tom, it's creative, Gardner admitted. Could work. We'd need our full M&A team on it, plus external counsel, investment bankers. It's resource intensive, but if we pull it off, it could shift the entire dynamic. Then let's explore it, Harold said. Tom, you lead execution. Jasmine, you work with his team on the analysis and strategy. Everyone else, this stays confidential until we're ready to announce. The next 6 weeks were among the most technically demanding of Jasmine's career. She worked 18-hour days alongside the M&A team, breaking down Titan Clean Power's operating history, tracing cash flow problems, building valuation scenarios, and identifying every point of failure. She absorbed more about complex corporate transactions in those weeks than in the previous 2 years combined. Thomas Gardner proved to be exactly the kind of senior leader she'd hoped to learn from. Direct, pragmatic, generous with knowledge, but never condescending. He explained nuances of deal mechanics, reviewed her models with precision, and treated her like a serious professional whose insights mattered. You've got good instincts, he told her once during a 1 a.m. model review. You don't guess your way into pattern recognition. You either see it or you don't, you see it. When Wellington Enterprises publicly announced it was evaluating the acquisition of Titan Clean Power at approximately $400 million, the press reacted instantly. Targets did not usually counterstrike, but Wellington had. And it worked exactly as Jasmine's analysis predicted. Titan's board faced shareholder backlash. Financial media dug into the subsidiary's losses. Internal divisions at Titan slowed their response. Their takeover attempt stalled. 3 weeks later, Titan formally withdrew. Wellington then closed the acquisition of Titan Clean Power for $380 million, $20 million below the initial indicative figure, following due diligence adjustments. At the board meeting after the deal closed, the atmosphere finally loosened. Harold looked more rested than he had in months. I want to acknowledge the person who identified the strategic opening that gave us room to maneuver, he said. Jasmine Turner. He continued, while she didn't execute the deal, that credit belongs to Tom and the full M&A team. Jasmine's analysis provided the foundation we built on. I'm promoting her to Director of Strategic Analysis. Compensation adjustments and equity will follow. The applause that followed wasn't ceremonial. The room understood the gravity of what had been prevented. Jasmine sat still for a moment, absorbing it. 3 years earlier she had fought to keep her infant warm in the back seat of a car. Now she'd helped prevent the dismantling of a multi-billion-dollar company. The distance between those two realities was almost disorienting. That evening she brought Marcus to Robert's apartment. He had insisted they have a simple dinner, nothing celebratory in the formal sense, just time to acknowledge a hard-won outcome. After the meal they sat on the balcony while Marcus arranged toy cars in careful rows on the floor inside. You protected the company, Robert said. His tone neutral, no embellishment, no exaggeration, just fact. Tom Gardner's team executed the defense, Jasmine replied. I only found a pressure point. Finding the pressure point is what prevented a takeover, Robert said. It mattered. Jasmine looked out at the skyline. I needed to prove to myself that I deserved to be here, and I wanted you to know your trust wasn't misplaced. That helping me wasn't a risk you shouldn't have taken. You don't owe me proof, Robert said. You did the work, you earned your place. That's the beginning and end of it. He wasn't the kind of man to embellish praise. That was why it landed with weight. Jasmine nodded. I'm still repaying the loan, but this today felt like repayment of a different kind. It was never about repayment, Robert said. I helped because it was the right thing to do. What you build from it is yours, not a debt to me. There was no sentimentality in his tone, simply clarity, and she appreciated clarity more than comfort.
She glanced through the balcony door at Marcus, who was now lining up toy cars by size. I wanted him to grow up seeing me stand on my own feet, Jasmine said. Not just be grateful for a second chance but do something with it. And he will, Robert said. Today is part of that. They stayed there quietly, a mentor and a rising professional, an older man seeing his company safeguarded, a younger woman seeing her future widen. A family, yes, but not bound by sentimentality, bound by decisions, by effort, by trust formed over time. The city lights flickered across the balcony as if acknowledging the shift. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it was simply the moment Jasmine realized she was no longer surviving the past, she was building forward. 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon, Jasmine sat alone in her small glass-walled office. The city spread out beyond Wellington Enterprises' windows like a map of every version of the life she might have had. Her inbox chimed. It was a quarterly report from the tiny side project she and Robert had started almost by accident. What had begun as him quietly covering a few months' rent for a young mother she knew from daycare, then another, then emergency childcare for a third. Harold's philanthropy team had helped them turn it into something slightly more structured, a modest internal fund for housing assistance and education support for single mothers in crisis. Jasmine opened the spreadsheet. Rows of names, case numbers, short notes. 2 months behind on rent, working nights, no childcare, fleeing domestic violence, temporary shelter full, sleeping on cousin's couch with 2 kids, accepted into nursing program, can't afford books. Her eyes snagged on one line near the bottom. Mother and 4-month-old living in car for 3 weeks, referred by church volunteer. Temporary housing arranged for 30 days. Need plan after that. The words blurred. For a moment she wasn't in an office with climate control and a view. She was back in the Honda, back in the cold, back to counting the days until she'd have to move the car before someone called the police. Back to the dampness in Marcus's clothes when it rained too hard and the glass fog too thick and she couldn't afford to run the heat. She scrolled through the notes column. The housing coordinator had written, Jasmine requested we prioritize this case. Says it looks a lot like her own file before things turned around. Mother very motivated, wants to finish medical assistant certification, needs longer runway. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, pressing the heels of her hands against her eyes until stars flared behind her eyelids. This isn't enough. They were helping people, yes, but it still felt piecemeal. A patch here, a bandage there. Every time they gave someone a month of rent or a semester of books, 3 more emails arrived with stories that sounded like hers used to. She closed the spreadsheet and opened a blank document instead. The cursor blinked. Patient. Mission targeted support for young mothers in crisis. Focus emergency housing, child care subsidies, education and job training. Goal: make sure no one has to live in a car with a baby the way I did. The words came faster once she started. By the time the office lights dimmed on their automatic evening setting, she had 3 pages of rough notes, ideas about partnerships, eligibility criteria, how to combine immediate relief with long-term stability. She saved the file. Then she picked up her phone and called Robert. Are you home? She asked. Yes, everything all right. I think I know what I want to build next, she said. Can I come over? Always. He already had tea waiting when she arrived, her favorite herbal blend, steam curling upward. Marcus was with a friend for a playdate, which meant, unusually, the apartment was quiet. Jasmine spread her printed pages on his kitchen table. I've been thinking, she said, tapping the top sheet. What we're doing now, it's good, but it's not big enough, not structured enough. I don't just want to help case by case. I want a real foundation, with a clear mandate. A place where those mothers don't have to rely on luck or on whether their story happens to reach the right inbox at the right time. Robert read in silence. He moved slowly, line by line, the way he did with important documents and good books. Emergency housing, he murmured. Child care stipends, scholarships tied to specific training programs, peer support groups run by women who've been there themselves. He looked up. This is thorough. I know what I needed, Jasmine said simply. I know what would have made those months in the car shorter, or maybe kept us out of the car entirely. I'm tired of watching women fall through the same cracks I did. He didn't rush to respond. That was something she'd come to value about him. He didn't fill silence just to avoid feeling it. Money isn't the problem, Robert said at last. Or at least it's the easiest problem to solve. I have more than enough to seed this properly. The harder part is structure, governance, sustainability. He tapped the papers. But you've already started thinking about that. I don't just want your name on a check, Jasmine said. I want your brain, your experience. I know finance, but I don't know how to build something that outlives us. You do. His expression softened at the word outlives. You're talking legacy, he said quietly. I guess I am. He leaned back, considering. We fold what we're already doing into this. Expand, formal board, clear criteria, dedicated staff who aren't just adding this to 10 other jobs. I'll put in my own money, Jasmine added quickly. Part of my salary, bonuses. I know it's not much compared to what you can contribute, but it matters. Robert interrupted gently. Not because of the amount, but because of what it means to you. You're not a beneficiary, You're a founder. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He glanced back down at the pages. We'll need a name. I was thinking about that, Jasmine said. Your wife Margaret. You told me Richardson was her maiden name. Robert nodded once, surprised. When you talk about her, Jasmine went on, you always end up talking about the way she cared about people, the way she made room for them. It feels right to have her in it too, if you're okay with that. He swallowed. For a second his eyes shone the way they had when he'd first heard Marcus call him Grandpa. I'd like that, he said quietly. Then, Richardson Turner Wellington Foundation, Jasmine asked. Her me and Marcus. You, he repeated it under his breath, tasting the syllables. Richardson Margaret's family, Turner Jasmine and Marcus, the line that almost broke. Wellington the man who refused to watch it break. Yes, he said. That fits. They sat for a moment with the decision, letting it settle between them. What do you want this to feel like for the women who come to us? Robert asked. Like the opposite of every door that's ever slammed in their face, Jasmine said without hesitating. Like someone finally believes them, like they're not crazy or incompetent or disposable just because life hit them hard. She looked down at the pages she'd written, then back up at him. I don't want them to have to beg for leftovers in restaurants, she said. I want them to know there's a place they can go before it gets that bad. Robert's gaze held hers, steady and full of something that went beyond pride. You're building what you needed, he said, and what so many others need. That's the best kind of work. They fell into a quiet that was not empty but full. Marcus's cartoons played softly on the TV in the next room from earlier. The bright colors flickered silently across the wall as Robert pushed the pages back toward her. We'll call Harold tomorrow, he said. Loop in the legal team. You'll chair the board. I'll sit exactly where you tell me to sit. She laughed, a startled wet sound she quickly wiped away with the heel of her hand. Don't do that, he said gently. Don't apologize for feeling strongly about your own life's work. She drew a deep breath. Okay. He watched her for a moment, then said, you know what I think? What? I think we spend too much time imagining family as something static, bloodlines and last names. But it's really about who shows up, who stays, who chooses to stand beside you when they could just as easily look away. He nodded toward the papers again. This foundation that's family too in its way. You're making a structure that will keep showing up, even when you can't be everywhere yourself. Jasmine's throat tightened. You didn't give me life, she said. Not in the biological sense, but you helped me keep it. You helped me build something worth having. That counts more than blood to me. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his solid, warm, unquestionably paternal. And you, Robert said quietly, are my family. You and Marcus both. She turned her palms so their fingers folded together, not romantic, not hesitant, just the simple trust of a daughter, bracing her weight against the father she'd found late, but exactly when she needed him. Then let's build this together, she said. For the next girl who thinks sleeping in her car is the end of the story. For the next girl, he agreed. And the next, and the next. It was during year 3, month 9 when the older man finally brought up legal guardianship. They were finishing their usual Sunday dinner at his apartment. The little boy 3 now, bursting with questions and toddler confidence, had long since started calling him Grandpa. Not because anyone taught him to, but because that was simply who the man had become in his world. The first time it happened, the older man had slipped away to the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink as he tried to steady a feeling he hadn't known in decades, being needed as family. After dinner, while the boy built a crooked tower in the living room and narrated every wobble, the older man asked the young mother to join him on the balcony. I want to talk to you about something important, he said, voice steady but tense. All right, these past 3 years you've become like a daughter to me. And your son, he's my grandson in everything but paperwork. He paused, then held out a neat folder of documents. I'd like to make that official. I want to become his legal secondary guardian. You remain his mother in every sense. Nothing changes that. I only want to stand where a father would stand for you, and where a grandfather should stand for him. The young mother's breath caught, not out of fear but recognition. She looked inside, saw her son kneeling on the rug trying to jam a square block into a round opening, exactly the kind of stubborn concentration the older man had encouraged with endless patience. She thought about hospital nights, shared breakfasts, rides to daycare, his steady presence, his gentle correction, his pride in the boy's drawings. and how, somewhere along the way, she had begun asking him questions the way a daughter asks a father, hesitant at first, then naturally. "You've already been my father for a long time," she said quietly. "And his grandfather, if this makes it real on paper, yes, I want that." Relief hit the older man like a physical thing. He didn't pull her into a romantic embrace, nothing about this resembled that, but he rested a steady hand on her shoulder, the way a father does when his grown child makes a decision that changes everything. The legal process took 4 months: home studies, interviews, background checks. Every part of it confirmed what all three of them already lived out daily: this was a family. The final hearing was on a bright Tuesday morning in April. The boy wore a bow tie and kept whispering questions. "Why is the judge sitting so high?" "So she can see everyone," his mother replied. "Does Grandpa get to sit up there too?" "No." "Why?" "Because those are the rules." The judge smiled at him warmly before turning to the adults. "Given the established relationship and the strong bond observed, I grant the petition." "Congratulations, Grandpa." The gavel dropped. It was official. The man was now in every legal sense the grandfather he had already become in their hearts. That evening, the apartment, once hollow and quiet, filled with laughter, co-workers, families their foundation had helped, children running between chairs. The young mother stood by the window, watching her son shine in the center of a small circle of kids, watching the man who had become her father talk animatedly with a colleague. Her chest ached, not with sorrow, but with something she had not felt in years: belonging. "You look happy," the older man said softly, stepping beside her. "I am," she said. "My son has a grandfather, and I have a father again." "I didn't think I'd ever say that, and I didn't think I'd ever have a family again," he replied. "I thought everything ended the night I lost mine. I was wrong. You walked into that restaurant asking for leftovers, and I didn't know that was the beginning. For all three of us," she said. Just then the boy sprinted over, breathless. "Grandpa, the cake boss says I can have cake." "Oh, does he now?" The older man laughed, lifting him easily. "Well, if the cake boss says so, we better hurry." As they headed toward the kitchen, her phone buzzed, a message about another young mother they'd helped earning a full scholarship. She tucked the phone away. There would be time to answer later. Right now she had cake to share with her son, and the man who had become her father, and for the first time in years, she felt whole. Robert stood at a podium in a lecture hall at Northwestern University, looking out at 200 students in Introduction to Social Work. The room carried the pleasant hum of young minds at work, laptop keys clicking, pens tapping lightly on desks, soft murmurs before the lecture began. It was the same building where his daughter had taken her finance classes years ago, though that felt like another lifetime entirely. In the back row, Jasmine sat with Marcus beside her. Marcus was 7 now, full of restless energy and quiet determination, coloring in a notebook while listening with one ear to his grandfather speak. He had insisted on coming. "I want to hear Grandpa Rowe talk to the college people," and Jasmine had agreed, moved by his curiosity and pride. "People ask me all the time why I helped," Robert said, resting his hands lightly on the podium. "They want to understand the motivation. Was it guilt, charity, a savior complex?" He paused. "And my answer is always the same. It was none of those things. It was recognition." The room quieted. "For 15 years after losing my wife and daughter, I was functional, but not alive. I built wealth I didn't need. I lived in an apartment that felt less like a home, and more like a very expensive tomb. Purpose had vanished from my life, and I didn't even notice how numb I had become." He let out a steady breath. "Then one night, a young woman with nothing asked me for my leftovers, and the way she fed her son, so carefully, so fiercely, with so much love despite having so little, something in me woke up." He looked toward the back row. Jasmine met his eyes, then glanced at her son, who was now shading a dinosaur with remarkable seriousness. She didn't need saving in the way people like to frame these things. Robert continued. "She needed a chance, space, a fair opportunity to use her talent without being crushed by one person's lies and a system's failure, and giving her that chance saved me. It reminded me what it feels like to live for something other than grief." A student lifted her hand. "Mr. Wellington, don't you think this story risks the narrative of a wealthy white man rescuing a struggling black woman? Isn't that reinforcing dangerous power dynamics?" "An excellent question," Robert said, nodding. "And yes, it's something I've reflected on deeply. Here's the truth.
I didn't save her. I gave her resources, access, structure, but Jasmine saved herself. She had the intelligence, resilience, and strength long before I showed up. My role was simply making sure the world saw what she already was, and in return, he smiled faintly, she gave me back a life worth living. She gave my grief somewhere to rest, and he looked at Marcus, she gave me a grandson. Another student raised his hand. What would you say to critics who view stories like this as exceptions, that they don't address systemic issues? I'd say they're right, Robert replied. Individual acts of kindness don't fix broken systems, they don't erase inequality. But systemic change starts with people who've learned to see each other's humanity. Compassion practiced individually becomes the seed for collective action. That's why Jasmine and I started the Richardson Turner Wellington Foundation. Individual help got us here. Systemic change is the goal. When the lecture ended, students lined up to speak with him. Among them was a young woman who hesitated before approaching, thin, exhausted, wearing clothes that told a harder story than her expression revealed. Mr. Wellington, she said quietly, I'm in a situation like the one you described. I aged out of foster care last year. I'm trying to stay in school, but I've been sleeping in my car for 3 months. I don't know how much longer I can keep going. Robert softened his expression, placing a gentle fatherly hand on her shoulder. What's your name? Christina. Christina, have you eaten today? She shook her head. All right, food first, everything else comes after. He gestured toward the back row. This is my daughter Jasmine. She runs our foundation. She'll help you. Jasmine approached with quiet understanding, the kind that comes from lived experience rather than sympathy. We've got you now, she said softly. You're not alone anymore. As they walked across campus together, Robert, Jasmine, Marcus and Christina, Marcus reached up and took Robert's hand. Grandpa Rowe, he asked, why did that lady cry when you said you'd help her? Because when someone's been scared and alone for a long time, Robert answered, hearing that help is on the way feels like a miracle. Even though it shouldn't have to be a miracle, it should just be what people do for one another. Oh, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Can we get pizza for dinner? Robert chuckled. Yes, buddy, pizza sounds perfect. That evening, after ensuring Christina had food, emergency resources, and safe temporary housing, they returned to Jasmine's apartment, a 3-bedroom home she'd bought the year before. It had space for Marcus to grow, and a guest room where Robert stayed when he didn't want to drive home. They ate pizza at the dining table, 3 generations of chosen family, their laughter filling the room. I have a spelling test tomorrow, Marcus declared. I have to spell friend and family and together. Those are excellent words, Robert said warmly. Very important ones. Grandpa Rowe, what does family mean? Robert smiled gently. Family means the people who choose to love you, who show up for you, who stay, even when life gets hard, like you and Mom and me. Exactly like that. Later, after Marcus was tucked into bed, Jasmine joined Robert on the balcony. The city lights stretched before them, Chicago glowing in the kind of soft, forgiving way only early spring could create. You know what I realized today? Robert asked. What? It's been 7 years since that night at the restaurant. 7 years since you asked me for my leftovers. It doesn't feel like 7 years. No, it feels like several lifetimes overlapping. She leaned her arms on the railing, the posture relaxed, grounded, nothing intimate, merely the ease of a daughter standing beside the man she trusted more than anyone. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd said no? Every day, Robert admitted. And every day, I'm grateful I didn't. Because this life, he gestured toward the apartment behind them, this family, this purpose, I didn't even know I needed it. Neither did I, Jasmine said. If you hadn't helped us, I don't know where we'd be. You would have found a way, Robert said firmly. You're stronger than you think. She smiled. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out alone. I'm glad you became well, Dad. He placed a steady hand on her back, not intimate, just a father's reassurance. I'm honored, sweetheart, truly. From inside, Marcus called out sleepily. Mom, is Grandpa Rowe still here? I'm here, buddy, Robert called back. Go back to sleep. Okay, love you, Grandpa Rowe. Love you too, kiddo. Jasmine's eyes softened. He saved you as much as you saved him. All 3 of us saved each other, Robert replied. That's what family does. We don't heal alone, we heal together. They stood quietly, taking in the city, the night, the peace that had once seemed impossible. Inside, the home buzzed with the gentle stillness of safety, books on shelves, toys in bins, stability forged from years of showing up for one another. Robert's mind drifted to Margaret and Sophie. For years thinking of them had been touching a wound. Now it was like visiting cherished memories, still painful, but softened by time and by the love he'd found again in this unexpected family. "I hope you'd be proud of me," he whispered into the night, knowing his late wife and daughter would never answer but feeling somehow that they understood. He slept that night in the guest room, and for the first time in 15 years, dreams of his old life blended gently, not with grief, but with gratitude. The next morning dawned golden. Jasmine made pancakes while Marcus organized toy cars. The apartment was full of clatter and warmth, domestic noise Robert once thought he'd never hear again. "Grandpa wrote," Marcus shouted, running to him. "Mom made the special pancakes, did she now?" Robert scooped him up. "And did you ask nicely?" "I said please 3 times. That's my boy." They ate together, talking about school, work, and the day ahead. It felt simple, ordinary, perfect. After breakfast, each went about their day, Robert to a meeting with the mayor, Jasmine to the foundation, Marcus to school. The foundation had grown bigger than either of them expected. Over 200 families helped. Christina would be 201. That afternoon, Jasmine met mothers the foundation had supported, women now strong enough to guide others. They discussed scaling operations, expanding partnerships, meeting the growing need. That evening at the park, Jasmine met another young mother on the edge of crisis. She handed her a card, offered support, spoke with the steady confidence of someone who had lived the darkness and survived it. Later she and Robert ate dinner at his apartment, while Marcus built elaborate block cities on the floor. "You know what's amazing?" Jasmine said. "Marcus won't remember the car, the hunger, the fear. He'll only remember this, having a grandfather, a home. That's exactly how it should be," Robert said. "And me?" she asked softly. "Do you think I'll ever stop remembering?" He looked at her gently. "No, but the memories will change shape. They won't weigh you down, they'll guide you." She nodded. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart. I'm glad you said yes that night." He smiled. "I'm glad you asked." Marcus suddenly ran to them holding a toy car. "Grandpa wrote. Look, this one can jump." Robert laughed, ruffling his hair. "You're full of surprises, kiddo." That night, after Marcus fell asleep on Robert's couch, they stepped onto his balcony. The city lights flickered in warm constellations. "Do you ever regret it?" Jasmine asked. "Helping me?" "Never," he said. "You brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," she said. "Exactly." When they finished cleaning the kitchen, Jasmine carried Marcus to the guest room. The quiet of the apartment wrapped around them like a blessing. In the darkness, Jasmine whispered to her sleeping son, "We're safe now. We're loved. We're home." In his room, Robert lay awake thinking of Margaret and Sophie, no longer with pain, but with gratitude. "I found them," he whispered. "A new family, not replacing you. Expanding what you taught me," and somehow in the stillness, he felt forgiven. 7 years ago, a young mother had asked a grieving man for leftovers. Tonight, they were a family. Tomorrow, they would wake up and continue choosing each other again and again, proving that healing is not a single miracle, but 1,000 ordinary moments of showing up, staying, and loving. That was the true epilogue. Not survival, not charity, but chosen family, built slowly and tenderly from the courage to reach out, and the grace to say yes.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.